Mike Reynolds wasn't the kind of guy who wanted trouble. He was a civil engineer, a man who spent his days designing bridges and drainage systems, solving problems with math and logic. He drove a 5-year-old Honda Accord. He mowed his lawn every Saturday at 9 a.m. He waved at his neighbors. He recycled. He had lived in Willow Creek Estates for 3 years. The house was a modest 3-bedroom, nothing fancy, but it was his first home he'd ever owned. He'd put in the hardwood floors himself. He'd painted every wall. His wife, Sarah, had picked the kitchen backsplash before she passed away 2 years ago. The house was his anchor. His sanctuary, the American flag on his porch, was a gift from his father, a retired Marine who had served 3 tours. When Mike's dad handed it to him at the housewarming party, he'd said, "Every American should have a flag on their porch, son. It's not political. It's just, home." So Mike flew the flag. Every day. He took it down at sunset. He folded it properly, triangle fold, the way his dad had taught him. It was a ritual. A quiet act of remembrance, for his country, for his father, for Sarah. The flag had been there for 3 years. Nobody had ever complained. Nobody had even mentioned it. It was just, there. Part of the scenery. Like the oak tree in the front yard or the blue shutters on the windows. Then the letter arrived. It was a Tuesday. Mike remembered because Tuesdays were his garbage day, and he just wheeled the bin to the curb when he noticed the envelope tucked into his screen door, not in the mailbox, but physically wedged into the door frame, which meant someone from the HOA had walked up to his house. The envelope was thick, cream-colored paper with the Willow Creek Homeowners Association embossed logo in the corner. It had that official weight to it, the kind of paper that says, "We spent money on this, and you're not going to like what's inside." Mike made himself a fresh cup of coffee before opening it. He sat at his kitchen table, the same table where Sarah used to do her crossword puzzles, and slid his finger under the flap. The letter was dated June 12. It was addressed to Michael J. Reynolds, 472, Maplewood Lane. Dear Mr. Reynolds, it has come to the attention of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association Architectural Review Committee that your property at 472, Maplewood Lane is currently displaying an unapproved exterior decoration in violation of Section 14.3b of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. Mike paused. Unapproved exterior decoration. He looked out the window. His house was the most boring house on the block. Beige siding. Standard landscaping. Nothing unusual. That he kept reading. Section 14.3b states, each residence may display no more than 1 flag of any kind on the exterior of the property or within any area visible from the street or common areas. The committee has determined that the flag currently displayed on your property is in violation of this section. Please remove all flags except one within 14 calendar days from the date of this notice. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $50 per day until the violation is remedied. Mike set the letter down. He walked to his front window and looked outside. He counted his flags. 1. There was 1 flag. A single American flag. On a single pole. Mounted to his porch. He read the letter again. Then a 3rd time. Remove all flags except one. But he only had 1 flag. What was he supposed to remove? 0.5 flags. Cut the flag in half, he called his dad. Frank Reynolds was 68 years old, retired from the Marine Corps after 26 years of service. He lived in a small house in Arizona now, where the HOA rules were simple: don't park on the grass and don't paint your house neon green. When Mike told him about the letter, Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Let me get this straight," Frank said. "They're telling you that you have too many flags, but you only have 1 flag. That's what the letter says. And that 1 flag is the one I gave you." "The same one, Dad." Silence. Mike could hear his father breathing. It was the kind of silence that preceded a very specific kind of Frank Reynolds response, the kind that had, over the years, resulted in 3 school board recall elections, 1 successful lawsuit against a car dealership, and an incident at a DMV that was still talked about in certain circles. "Son," Frank said slowly, "do you remember what I taught you about rules? That they're meant to be followed? No. That a rule without a clear definition is not a rule. It's a suggestion wearing a uniform." Mike hadn't heard that one before. "What does that mean?" "It means," Frank said, "that if this HOA of yours didn't define what they mean by one flag, then they handed you a loaded weapon and dared you to pull the trigger." Mike stared at the letter. "You're saying I should ignore it?" "I'm saying you should read the rulebook. Not the letter, the actual CC and RS. Every page. Every word. And I'm saying you should pay very close attention to what's not in there. Because people who write bad rules always leave something out. It's like building a fence and forgetting to close the gate." Mike looked out the window at his flag. It was waving gently in the morning breeze. "Dad," he said, "how do you feel about 500 flags?" There was another long pause. Then Frank Reynolds let out a laugh that Mike hadn't heard since before Sarah got sick, a deep, booming laugh that rattled the phone speaker. "Son," Frank said, "I'll help you put them in the G." The Willow Creek CC and RS were 87 pages long. Mike downloaded them from the HOA's website, a PDF that looked like it had been scanned from a photocopy of a fax from 1997 that he printed all 87 pages. He bought a fresh pack of highlighters, yellow, green, and pink. He cleared the dining table. He made a pot of coffee. He started reading at 8 p.m. By midnight, he had read 43 pages and consumed 4 cups of coffee. His notes filled 3 pages of a legal pad. What he discovered was fascinating. The CC and RS were a masterpiece of bureaucratic overreach wrapped in the thinnest veneer of legal precision. There were rules about the acceptable shades of beige for house paint. Rules about the maximum height of mailbox posts. Rules about which direction garage doors could face. A full page dedicated to the proper storage of garbage bins. 3 paragraphs about bird feeders, but the section on flags? Section 14.3b, it was 1 sentence long. Each residence may display no more than 1 flag of any kind on the exterior of the property or within any area visible from the street or common areas. That was it. 1 sentence. No definitions. No exceptions. No size limits. No mounting specifications. No numerical clarification. Mike read the sentence 20 times. He checked every other section for cross-references. Nothing. Section 14 was titled, Exterior Decorations and Displays. Subsection 14.1 covered holiday decorations. 14.2 covered lawn ornaments. 14.3 covered flags and banners. And 14.3 contained exactly 1 sentence, the one about 1 flag per residence. Whoever wrote this section had clearly assumed that the word flag was self-explanatory. That nobody would ever challenge it. That reasonable people would understand what they meant. They had not accounted for Mike Reynolds. At 2:30 a.m., Mike made a new note. He wrote in capital letters, underlined twice, the rule does not define flag. The rule does not define display. The rule does not set a numerical limit. The rule does not prohibit duplicates of the same flag. He leaned back in his chair. His back ached. His eyes burned. But his mind was racing that he had found the gate. And it was wide open. Dave Kowalski was Sarah's brother. After Sarah passed, Dave had stuck around, not out of obligation, but because he genuinely liked Mike. They were brothers now, not just brothers-in-law. Dave was a construction foreman, big hands, loud laugh, and a congenital inability to say no to a bad idea. When Mike explained the plan over Saturday morning coffee, Dave listened without interrupting. When Mike finished, Dave sat back in his chair and was quiet for about 10 seconds, then he said, "So you want to buy 500 American flags and plant them in your yard like a patriotic cornfield?" "Correct. And this is technically legally, following the HOA rule. The rule says 1 flag. I'll have 1 flag. 500 copies of it. Dave stared at him. Mike, I have known you for 12 years. You are the most reasonable, boring, law-abiding person I have ever met. You file your taxes 3 months early. You keep your receipts organized by category. You own a label maker. And now you're telling me you want to start a war with your HOA using wholesale American flags? Yes. Dave's face broke into a massive grin. This is the greatest thing I've ever heard. I'm in. I am 100% in. When do we start? First, we need supplies. Mike pulled out his laptop and showed Dave the spreadsheet he'd made. It was, predictably, meticulously organized. Row by row, column by column, with formulas and cost projections and a timeline. The plan was, Phase 1, procurement, 500 American flags, 3 by 5 feet, 500 wooden stakes, 4 feet tall, 500 zip ties, and 1 post hole digger. Estimated cost, $266. Supplier, flagsforless.com, an online wholesaler that sold bulk flags to schools, veterans groups, and, apparently, homeowners bent on proving a point. Phase 2, layout, a grid pattern covering the entire front yard, both side yards, and the perimeter of the backyard. 2-foot spacing between stakes. That meant 20 rows of 25 flags. Military precision. Phase 3, installation, 1 day. 2 men. Starting at dawn. Finish by noon. Phase 4, documentation, photographs of every step. Time stamped. A copy of Section 14.3b, printed and laminated, ready to hand to any HOA representative who showed up. Dave looked at the spreadsheet. You laminated the rule. I went to Staples. You are a madman. A beautiful, organized madman. The flags arrived on a Thursday. 14 boxes. Mike had taken the day off work. The freight driver, a man named Eddie who had been driving delivery trucks for 22 years, asked Mike what he was going to do with 500 flags. I'm decorating, Mike said. Eddie looked at the boxes. Then at Mike's modest 3-bedroom house. Then back at the boxes. You running for office or something? Something like that. Eddie shrugged. In his 22 years, he delivered stranger things. The boxes were heavy, about 40 pounds each. Mike and Dave carried them into the garage one by one. When they finished, Dave stood with his hands on his hips, looking at the stack of 14 boxes. Mike, we are about to do something that is either going to make you famous or get you sued. Possibly both. I just want you to know, Dave said, that Sarah would have absolutely loved this. She would have been the first one out there with a stake in one hand and a flag in the other. She always said you had a secret troublemaker hiding inside that engineer brain. Mike smiled. It was the first time in a while that talking about Sarah didn't hurt quite so much. She would have loved this. She had always told him he was too passive, that sometimes you had to push back. The tree that doesn't bend breaks, she used to say. Well, Mike was about to bend the HOA's rulebook so far it would snap. That's when Mrs. Patterson appeared. Evelyn Patterson was 76 years old, had lived in Willow Creek since it was built, and was the unofficial neighborhood historian. She knew everything about everyone, who was getting divorced, whose kid was on academic probation, and exactly how much the Callaways had paid for their kitchen renovation. Michael, she said, standing at the edge of his driveway in her gardening hat, what in heaven's name is in all those boxes? Flags, Mrs. Patterson. Flags? What kind of flags? American flags. 500 of them. Mrs. Patterson blinked. She processed this information. Then she looked at the 14 boxes. Then at Mike. Then at the single flag on his porch. This is about the HOA letter, isn't it? How did you? They sent the same letter to the Johnsons last year about their wind chimes. Told them they could only have one. The Johnsons took theirs down. Moved out 6 months later. Said they were tired of being treated like tenants in their own home. Mike hadn't known about the Johnsons. Or their wind chimes. He was starting to realize he wasn't the first person the HOA had targeted. "When are you putting them up?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Saturday." Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll bring lemonade. And my camera. This is going to be wonderful." Friday was preparation day. Mike and Dave set up an assembly line in the garage. Dave opened boxes. Mike attached flags to stakes. They worked in rhythm: open, attach, stack. Open, attach, stack. That IT took 6 hours. By the end, they had 500 flag stake assemblies, each one identical, a 4-foot wooden stake with a 3x5 American flag secured by 2 zip ties near the top and bottom. The stakes were piled in neat bundles of 25, ready for deployment. Mike's garage looked like a staging area for a patriotic invasion. At 7 p.m., they ordered pizza. They sat on the garage floor, surrounded by flags, eating pepperoni and drinking beer. "You know what the best part of this is?" Dave said, gesturing with a pizza slice. "You're not breaking any rules. You're not even bending them. You're following the rule exactly as written. They can't do anything." "They can fine me," Mike said. "They already threatened to." "Then you fight the fine. And you'll win. Because you have something they don't." "What's that?" Dave grinned. "You read the manual." That night, Mike couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every scenario in his head. What if the HOA called the police? What if they tried to trespass? What if they took him to court? Around 3 a.m., he got up and checked the CC and RS one more time. He reread section 14.3b. He reread section 9.1a, the nuisance clause. He reread section 11.2, the enforcement procedures. He reread section 17.5, the dispute resolution requirements. Everything was there. The rulebook was on his side. The words were on his side. At 4:30 a.m., he stopped reading and started getting ready. Dawn was coming. And with it, 500 flags. Saturday. 5:45 a.m. Sunrise was at 6:12. Mike wanted to be ready. Dave arrived at 5:50, holding 2 large thermoses of coffee. "I told my wife what we're doing. She said we're idiots. I told her that's why she married me." They started at the property line. Mike had marked the flag positions the night before with small orange flags, ironically, the same kind used for utility marking. A grid, 2 feet apart, running from the front sidewalk to the back fence. The process was simple: dig a 6-inch hole, insert stake, tamp down the soil, move to the next position. Repeat 499 more times. The first hour was easy. The air was cool. The sun was rising. The flags looked beautiful, the red, white, and blue vivid against the green grass. By 8 a.m., they had planted 200 flags. The front yard was transformed. It looked like a veterans memorial, or a 4th of July celebration, or, depending on your perspective, the most aggressive landscaping statement in suburban history. The first neighbor to notice was Tom Henderson from across the street. Tom was a retired high school teacher who walked his golden retriever, Buster, at 7:30 every morning. When he reached Mike's house, he stopped dead in his tracks. "Mike?" Tom called out, Buster straining at his leash. What is happening?" "Following the HOA rules, Tom." Tom stared at the field of flags. He had been on the HOA board for 2 years before quitting. He said the meetings were longer than his master's thesis defense and twice as petty. "The HOA sent you a letter, didn't they?" "They said I could only have 1 flag." Tom looked at the 200 flags already planted, then at the remaining boxes stacked on the driveway. A slow smile spread across his face. "You're going to put up all of them, aren't you?" "Every single one." Tom stood there for a moment, Buster wagging his tail. Then he said, "I'll get my camera. The board needs to see this." By 9:30, word had spread. Neighbors were coming out of their houses in pajamas and bathrobes, coffee cups in hand, staring at the sea of flags spreading across Mike's property. Some were confused. Some were amused. A few, the ones who had also been on the receiving end of HOA violation letters, were openly cheering. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 10 a.m. with a pitcher of lemonade and her digital camera. She set up a lawn chair on the sidewalk and started taking photos. "For the newsletter," she said. "I've been waiting 20 years for someone to do something like this." By noon, all 500 flags were in the ground. The effect was overwhelming. Mike's property wasn't just decorated, it was transformed. The house itself seemed to disappear behind a field of waving fabric. When the wind blew, the entire yard rippled like a flag on a monumental scale. People were pulling over on the main road. Cars slowed down. Someone in a pickup truck rolled down his window and yelled, "God bless America." A woman in a minivan stopped and asked if this was an art installation. Dave told her, "It's a middle finger in flag form." The mailman, a guy named Ralph who had been delivering mail to Willow Creek for 15 years, stopped his truck and just stared. "I've seen a lot of weird things on this route," he said. "This is top 5. Maybe top 3. Top 3? Mike asked. There was a guy in 2019 who filled his entire front yard with garden gnomes. 700 of them. Fought the HOA for 8 months. He lost. Had to remove them all. What happened to him? Moved to a neighborhood without an HOA. Sent the board a postcard from his new house. Said he bought 800 gnomes for the new place. Mike filed that information away. By 1 p.m., someone had posted photos to the neighborhood Facebook group. The comments were divided. Beautiful display. So patriotic. 47 likes. This is an eyesore. Someone call the HOA. 3 likes, 18 angry reactions. Is this legal? Genuinely asking. 12 likes. I hope this is about the same HOA that made me repaint my door 3 times last year. 89 likes. Mike didn't check Facebook. He was too busy standing on his porch, drinking Mrs. Patterson's lemonade, admiring his work. Dave was sitting on the steps, exhausted but grinning. You know what's coming next, right? Dave said. I'm counting on it. And right on cue, at 2:17 p.m., a silver Lexus screeched to a halt in front of the house. Richard Calloway was the kind of man who had peaked in high school and had been trying to recreate that feeling of authority ever since. He was 54 years old, semi-retired from a middle management position at an insurance company, and he had been president of the Willow Creek HOA for 7 consecutive terms, mostly because nobody else wanted the job. He treated the HOA like a personal kingdom. The CC and RS were his royal decrees. The violation notices were his way of reminding people who was in charge. And Mike Reynolds, quiet, unassuming Mike Reynolds who never complained about anything, was supposed to be an easy target. He was not prepared for 500 flags. When Richard stepped out of his Lexus, his face was already flushed. By the time he reached the edge of Mike's property, he didn't step onto the grass. Mike noticed, the flush had deepened to an angry crimson. What, Richard said, his voice strained with barely contained fury, do you think you're doing? Mike took a slow, deliberate sip of lemonade. Good afternoon, Richard. This is not good. This is the opposite of good. What is all this? Flags. I can see their flags. Richard's voice cracked. Why are there 500 flags on your property? Mike set down his lemonade. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out the laminated copy of Section 14.3b. He had it ready. He had been waiting for this moment. You sent me a letter, Mike said, his voice calm and even. The letter referenced Section 14.3, b. of the CC and RS. Each residence may display no more than one flag. I read the rule. I followed the rule. Richard stared at the laminated card. You laminated it? Staples. $2.49. There are 500 flags. Mike held up one finger. One flag. 500 copies. The rule does not define the word flag. It does not set a numerical limit. It does not prohibit duplicates. I am displaying one flag, the American flag, and I happen to own 500 copies of it. Richard's left eye twitched. This was an involuntary response, but Mike noted it with quiet satisfaction. That is not what the rule means. The rule says what it says, Richard. If the HOA wanted to limit copies or define flag or set a numerical limit, it should have written those things into the CC and RS. It didn't. So here we are. Richard pulled out his phone. His hands were trembling slightly. You'll be hearing from our attorney. This is a deliberate provocation. This is bad faith. This is compliance, Mike said. Creative compliance. Which, by the way, is not prohibited anywhere in the CC and RS. I checked. Richard opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. No words came out that he got back in his Lexus. He slammed the door. He drove away. Dave, who had been watching from the porch steps, let out a low whistle. Mike, I have never seen a grown man look so defeated by a laminated piece of paper. Mrs. Patterson, still in her lawn chair, raised her lemonade glass. That was magnificent. Simply magnificent. The Willow Creek HOA board held an emergency meeting on Monday night. It was not a regularly scheduled meeting, those were the third Thursday of every month. This was an emergency executive session, which the board was technically allowed to call under Section 5.4a of the CC and RS, as long as they notified all residents 48 hours in advance. They did not notify Mike. The board consisted of 5 members. Richard Calloway, President. Patricia Holloway, Vice President, a retired real estate agent who had never met a regulation she didn't like. Dr. Sanjay Mehta, Treasurer, a dentist who had joined the board to make sure the community pool stayed funded and had somehow been dragged into a flag war. Barbara Chen, Secretary, who took meeting minutes with the precision of a court reporter and the enthusiasm of someone counting ceiling tiles. And finally, Jerry Kowalski, Member at Large, no relation to Dave, which Jerry had to clarify at every single meeting. The emergency meeting had one agenda item, 472, Maplewood Lane, exterior display violation. Richard began by displaying photos of Mike's property. He had taken them from the sidewalk, 47 photos, to be exact, from multiple angles. He projected them onto the wall of the community center conference room. As you can see, Richard said, Mr. Reynolds has turned his property into a spectacle. A circus. We cannot allow this. Dr. Mehta raised his hand. What rule is he violating, exactly? He has flags. Section 14.3b says he can have one flag. He has one flag, technically. Richard's jaw tightened. He has 500 flags, Sanjay. But they're all the same flag. There's no clause about duplication. That's absurd. Of course duplication is prohibited by the spirit of the rule. The spirit of the rule, Dr. Mehta repeated. Not the letter. Barbara Chen, who had been typing furiously, stopped. The letter of the CC and RS is what's enforceable. That's what our attorney told us last year during the bird feeder situation. Spirit doesn't hold up in court. Richard slammed his hand on the table. Then we use another section. Section 9.1a, Nuisance Clause. Any exterior display that constitutes a nuisance to neighboring properties. Has anyone actually complained? Dr. Mehta asked. I mean, besides you. I have received verbal complaints. From whom? Residents who wish to remain anonymous. Richard, you can't find someone based on anonymous complaints, and you know it. The meeting went on for 2 hours. In the end, Richard pushed through a vote, 3-2, with Dr. Mehta and Jerry Kowalski dissenting. The board would issue a formal violation under Section 9.1a, classifying the 500 flags as a nuisance. The fine would be $250, the maximum allowed under the CC&RS. Should we notify him of his right to appeal? Barbara asked. Richard waved his hand dismissively. That's a formality. He's deliberately provoking us. We don't need to hold his hand through the process. That single sentence, "we don't need to hold his hand through the process," would later be read aloud in a courtroom, and Richard would regret it for the rest of his life. The second letter arrived on a Thursday, 9 days after Flag Day. This one was delivered by certified mail, signature required. The mailman, Ralph, handed it to Mike personally. "This one looks serious," Ralph said. "They always do." Mike opened the letter at his kitchen table, the same table where this whole thing had started. The envelope contained 3 documents. Document 1, a formal violation notice citing Section 9.1a, the nuisance clause. The HOA had determined that 500 flags constituted a visual nuisance impacting the aesthetic character of the neighborhood and potentially affecting property values. The fine, $250, payable within 30 days. Document 2, a cease and desist demand ordering Mike to remove all but one flag within 14 days. Document 3, a notice that failure to comply would result in additional fines of $50 per day, and that the HOA reserved the right to take legal action including placing a lien on the property. Lien on the property. Those words hit Mike like a punch to the gut. This was his house. His home. His and Sarah's home. And these people were threatening to take it away over flags that he carefully set the letter down. He took 3 deep breaths, a technique he'd learned during Sarah's illness, when the anxiety would spike and the world would feel like it was closing in. In for 4 counts. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Then he picked up his copy of the CC&RS and turned to Section 9.1a. Any exterior display that, in the sole discretion of the board, constitutes a nuisance to neighboring properties may be subject to fines and removal orders under Section 11. His eyes drifted down the page. Section 9.1a was immediately followed by Section 9.1b. He had read it before, but now he read it with fresh eyes. Any determination of nuisance by the board may be appealed in writing within 30 days of the violation notice. The board shall respond to any such appeal within 14 days. If the board denies the appeal, the homeowner may seek review. Mike read this section 3 times. Then he checked the letter again. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. He flipped through all the documents. Nowhere, not once, did the HOA mention Section 9.1b. They didn't tell him about his right to appeal. They didn't provide an appeal form. They didn't even hint that he had any recourse other than paying the fine and taking down his flags. They had violated their own rulebook. The very document they were using against him, they had broken it. Mike called Dave. "I need you to take another day off work." "What for?" "Court. I'm taking them to court." There was a pause. "Mike, you don't have a lawyer." "I don't need one. The CC&RS are my lawyer." The Hamilton County Small Claims Court was a modest building, white columns, a flagpole out front. Mike noted the single American flag with some amusement, and a metal detector at the entrance. Mike filed his case on a Monday morning. The filing fee was $95. He was suing the Willow Creek HOA for violating its own CC&RS by denying him due process under Section 9.1b. He was seeking reversal of the $250 fine, dismissal of the violation, and a declaratory judgment that his 500 flags did not violate the CC&RS. The clerk who processed his paperwork, a tired-looking woman named Gloria who had seen every kind of small-town dispute imaginable, read his filing with growing interest. "HOAs," she said, not looking up. I've seen people sue over fence heights. I've seen people sue over paint colors. I've seen a guy sue because his neighbor's cat kept looking at him through the window. But 500 flags? That's a new one. Is that good or bad? Entertaining, she said. Judge Morrison likes entertaining. Judge Patricia Morrison. Mike made a mental note. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday, August 14th, at 10 a.m. Mike had 2 weeks to prepare, that he spent those 2 weeks like a law student cramming for the bar exam. He read every HOA court case he could find in the county records. He researched nuisance law. He organized his evidence into a binder with color-coded tabs, because of course he did. Tab 1, the original HOA letter. Tab 2, photos of his property before the flags. Tab 3, photos of his property with the flags. Tab 4, Section 14.3b, of the CC and RS, with the undefined terms highlighted. Tab 5, the second HOA letter, with the missing appeal notice circled in red. Tab 6, Section 9.1a, and 9.1b, side by side. Tab 7, a dictionary definition of flag. Tab 8, a dictionary definition of copy. Tab 9, a list of other neighborhoods in the county that had no flag restrictions. Tab 10, character reference letters from Mrs. Patterson, Tom Henderson, and Dave. He was ready. Courtroom 3B was small, wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lighting, that particular smell of old paper and floor wax that all courthouses seem to have. The gallery seated about 30 people. It was nearly full. Mrs. Patterson was there, in her Sunday dress, sitting in the front row. Tom Henderson was beside her. Dave was 2 rows back, wearing a button-down shirt that still had the crease marks from the package. He'd bought it specifically for court. Even Ralph the mailman had taken an extended lunch break to watch. At the defendant's table sat Gerald Whitfield, the HOA's attorney. Gerald was a man in his late 50s with an expensive suit, an expensive haircut, and an expression that suggested he considered this entire proceeding beneath him. He billed $400 an hour. The HOA had already paid him $2,400 just to prepare for this hearing. Judge Morrison entered. Everyone rose. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the case file. Reynolds vs. Willow Creek Homeowners Association, she read. Mr. Reynolds, you are representing yourself? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Whitfield for the defendant. Are both parties ready to proceed? Yes, Your Honor, they said in unison. Mr. Whitfield, you may begin. Gerald stood, buttoned his jacket, and approached the podium with the practiced confidence of someone who had done this thousands of times. He argued that Mike had acted in bad faith, that the 500 flags were a deliberate mockery of the CC and RS. He used phrases like malicious compliance, bad faith interpretation, and deliberate provocation. He cited cases. He made sweeping hand gestures. Judge Morrison listened. She took notes. Her face revealed nothing. And the appeal notice, she asked when Gerald paused for breath. I'm sorry, Your Honor. Section 9.1b of the CC and RS requires the board to inform the homeowner of their right to appeal. Did the board do that? Gerald shuffled his papers. The board believed the violation was self-evident, Your Honor. Mr. Reynolds. Then it was Mike's turn. He walked to the podium without notes, just his binder and a single item he kept face down until the right moment. Your Honor, I'd like to start with a simple question. What is a flag? Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. I assume you have an answer, Mr. Reynolds. Mike opened his binder to tab 7. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines a flag as a usually rectangular piece of fabric of distinctive design that is used as a symbol. That's it. A piece of fabric. Used as a symbol. No mention of uniqueness. No mention of copies. He turned the page. Section 14.3b of the CC and RS states, each residence may display no more than one flag of any kind. The word flag is used in the singular. But here's what section 14.3b does not do. He began counting on his fingers, one by one. It does not define the word flag. It does not specify a number. It does not specify a size. It does not specify a mounting location. It does not prohibit multiple copies of the same flag. It does not even define display. He looked up from the binder. The HOA wrote the rules. If they wanted a numerical limit, they could have written one. They could have said, no more than one flag, regardless of whether the flags are identical or different. They could have said, no more than one copy of any flag. They didn't. They wrote one flag. I have one flag. I have 500 copies of it. He paused for effect, a trick he'd learned from watching hours of courtroom footage during his research. The HOA is asking this court to enforce a rule that doesn't exist. They want you to punish me for violating the spirit of a rule, not the rule itself. But the CC and RS are a legal document, Your Honor. If a rule doesn't define its terms, then those terms carry their ordinary meaning. The ordinary meaning of one flag does not prohibit multiples of the same flag. Judge Morrison made another note. Mike continued to section 9.1b. And then there's the matter of due process, he said. The HOA fined me $250 under section 9.1a, the nuisance clause. But they never told me about section 9.1b, which is on the very next page of the CC and RS, giving me the right to appeal. They never sent an appeal form. They never mentioned I had any recourse. He held up the violation letter. This letter is 3 pages long. It threatens fines, liens, and legal action. It does not mention appeal once. Not a single time. Judge Morrison held up her hand. Mr. Reynolds, you may step back. She turned to Gerald Whitfield. Her voice was calm, which, as anyone who has spent time in courtrooms knows, is far more dangerous than anger. Mr. Whitfield. Did the board notify Mr. Reynolds of his right to appeal before imposing this fine? Gerald stood. He looked less confident now. Your Honor, as I mentioned, the board believed. I didn't ask what the board believed. I asked if they followed their own rules. Did they or did they not notify him of his appeal rights? The notification was implicit, Your Honor. Implicit. Judge Morrison removed her glasses. Mr. Whitfield, in my 22 years on this bench, I have never, not once, seen a contract enforced against someone while the enforcing party simultaneously violated the same contract. The CC and RS are a contract between the HOA and the homeowners. The HOA wants to enforce section 14.3b against Mr. Reynolds. But the HOA itself violated section 9.1b. She put her glasses back on and looked down at her notes. Let me save everyone some time. The CC and RS say Mr. Reynolds can have one flag. He has one flag, duplicated 500 times, which the CC and RS do not prohibit. If the board wanted to prohibit duplicates, it should have written that into the document. It did not. The gallery erupted. Not in chaos, in restrained, courtroom-appropriate celebration. Mrs. Patterson was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Dave was pumping his fist. Tom Henderson was laughing so hard he had to brace himself against the bench. Mike gathered his binder and walked out of the courtroom. In the hallway, Gerald Whitfield brushed past him without making eye contact. Richard Calloway was nowhere to be seen. He had apparently exited through a side door. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Dave grabbed Mike in a bear hug. You did it. You actually did it. The CC and RS did it, Mike said. I just read them. Mrs. Patterson took Mike's hands in hers. Michael, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in a courtroom, and I was a juror on a murder trial in 1987. You made that lawyer look like a fool. Ralph the mailman slapped Mike on the back. "This is going in the newsletter, right, Evelyn?" "It's going to be the entire newsletter." That evening, Mike sat on his porch, his flag porch, as it was now known throughout the neighborhood, and watched the sunset. The 500 flags caught the golden light and seemed to glow. It was, he thought, genuinely beautiful. His phone rang. It was his dad. "I heard you won," Frank said. "Word travels fast." Mrs. Patterson called her sister in Phoenix, who called her bridge partner, who goes to the same VFW as my buddy Carl. "I knew before you left the courthouse." Mike laughed. "It's over, Dad. They can't touch the flags." "I know, son. I know." Frank was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather flew a flag outside his house every day for 40 years. He'd be proud of you. Not for the 500 flags. For standing up. For not letting them push you around." Mike looked at the field of flags. "Thanks, Dad. You know what you should do now?" "What?" "Add one more flag. Make it 501. Just because you can." Mike kept the flags up for exactly 30 days after the court victory. Long enough for every board member to drive past them every single day. Long enough for the story to spread beyond the neighborhood. It made the local newspaper. Homeowner wages flag war against HOA, and wins, then a regional news segment, then a brief mention on a national morning show, then, on September 14th, he took them down, but he didn't throw them away. That he donated all 500 flags to the local Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, which distributed them to families across the county. He included a handwritten note with each box, from a grateful American who proved that reading the fine print matters. The VFW post commander, a Vietnam veteran named Sergeant Morrison, no relation to the judge, but everyone asked, called Mike personally to thank him. "These flags are going to families who will treasure them," he said. "And the story behind them? That's worth more than the flags themselves." And the HOA, they spent the next 3 months rewriting Section 14 of the CC and RS. The new version was 417 words long. It defined flag as any flexible material bearing a design and attached to a pole or similar mounting device, whether flown vertically or horizontally, with each distinct mounting location constituting a separate display. It limited flag displays to the American flag, the state flag of any U.S. state or territory, or a flag recognized by the United States Armed Forces. It specified maximum dimensions. It set a hard limit of 1 flag per property, period, end of discussion. The amendment passed 4-1. Dr. Mehta voted against it, not because he disagreed with the clarity, but because, as he put it, Mike earned the right to 500 flags, and rewriting the rules after you lose is just poor sportsmanship. The HOA's total legal fees for the flag war, $7,800 in attorney costs, plus the $250 fine they had to refund, plus printing costs for the new CC and RS, plus untold hours of board member time and emotional. If you enjoyed watching an HOA get destroyed by their own rulebook, hit that subscribe button. There are thousands more stories like this one, and I'm going to tell every single one of them. Mike still lives at 472 Maplewood Lane. He still flies one American flag on his porch, the same one his father gave him. Richard Calloway resigned as HOA president 4 months later, citing personal reasons. Everyone knew the real reason. Drop a comment. What would you have done if you were Mike? And if you've ever dealt with a power-tripping HOA, share your story. I might feature it in the next video, and remember, always read the fine print. Because the people who write bad rules are the same people who never expect you to actually read them.